Hi, and welcome to the Hotline, your online hotline direct line to the women-only attorneys at Hofheimer Family Law. My name is Katie Carter, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a Virginia-based family law attorney at Hofheimer Family Law, a Virginia-based firm dedicated to representing women exclusively, and I'm here today with my friend and colleague, Caitlyn Walters, who also practices in our office, and we wanted to talk to you a little bit more about prenuptial agreements. So full disclosure, before I go any further, I'm just going to say it. I hate them. I hate
Yes.
prenups with a fiery burning passion. And I don't think there's anything you could possibly tell me, Caitlyn, that would change my mind. But I still want to hear your thoughts about it too. I know you recently got a new prenup agreement case, and so I wanted to talk to you about it. So what do you say? Prenups, yay, nay, or something else?
So generally, I don't like them either. I
Thank
will just put
goodness.
that out there.
We
Generally,
can
I
still be
agree.
friends.
Yes, we could. Yes, we still are friendly. Generally, yeah, not a fan. I think though, it's one of those things, and this is such a lawyer answer. It depends. I suppose there can be situations where prenups are appropriate, can be helpful. I've yet to really see lots of cases where they're super helpful, but definitely the biggest piece of advice we can give you really with anything, but especially prenups, is you really, really, really need to meet with a Virginia attorney to have it reviewed before you sign it, because they can have incredibly serious consequences once they are signed that can really have an impact on a lot of things. And really, I mean, once it's signed, you're basically stuck with it. It is almost impossible to get out of a prenup, just like it's almost impossible to get out of a separation agreement or any agreement that you sign. So you really want to make sure that you work with an attorney if a prenup is given to you, or if it's something that you're considering that you would like to propose to your future spouse before you get married. Again, just to have that kind of discussed, looked at, figure out if it's something that would be appropriate. Again, I've not encountered a lot of cases where I think that they're necessary or helpful, but I suppose again, it could happen, just like anything could happen, but I'm not a huge fan of them either, honestly.
Yeah, it's like a unicorn, right? Like
Right.
just because I haven't seen one doesn't mean they don't exist.
But
But I highly suspect that there are very few actually mutually beneficial prenuptial agreements. And that's
yes.
that's always my big concern. Usually in these cases, I mean, I've seen a number of them come across my desk, and there's usually a pretty big disparity in income. We have one party that's much, much, much higher earning and one party that is lesser earning or has less family assets and things like that. And one of the first pieces of advice I would say too, like obviously talk to a lawyer, but get an idea of what would happen if you were to get a divorce in this case and what you're actually
Mhm.
legally entitled to receive. And don't go into this like negotiating about what sounds fair or what seems reasonable based on what your soon to be spouse is telling you. In
Right.
Virginia, like a lot of states across the country, we already have provisions that protect what we call separate property. So things that you earned prior to marriage. So if he's saying, oh, well, we're just protecting, my business or whatever real estate that I'm bringing into the marriage, well, that's already protected. So chances are what he's actually trying to do is a lot more wide reaching than that. Usually what
Right.
I see in these agreements is a waiver of spousal support and a waiver of retirement assets that you would have otherwise been entitled to receive. So it's important to know going in what you might be entitled to under Virginia's laws or the laws of whatever state you're living in, but so that you're then not negotiating with yourself based on, oh yeah, like that sounds fair. Most people are like, yeah, whatever you bring into the marriage, obviously that's yours. That makes sense, right? That feels fair. But I think that's a sneaky way of kind of, you know, entering into this conversation sideways and getting you to agree to waive things that you would have otherwise been entitled to receive. So
Right.
I think that's the big risk.
Right. I agree. I agree.
Have you seen a lot of prenups, Caitlyn, that have mutually beneficial provisions? I always joke that I haven't seen them, but I mean, because I truly haven't, but I don't know what your experience has been.
Not really, no. Usually it is no. Usually it is one person who has something that they are trying to protect
Mhm.
in particular, and it is again usually the higher income earner or the person who has family that has a lot of income. The richer family has a lot of
Yeah.
assets that they're trying to protect, that they're trying to then protect throughout the marriage. And as Katie said, we have laws that protect separate property. Again, both things that you've earned prior to the marriage, as well as an inheritance that you receive during the marriage. If it's kept separate, those remain separate
Mhm.
property in the event of a divorce. So there are ways that those items can be protected in the event of a divorce that we don't need a premarital agreement or a prenup to
Yeah.
protect. So it hasn't been very often that I've seen premarital agreements or prenups come across my desk where there's been something to benefit both parties. Typically, it is, again, unfortunately, one person that I've seen benefited from it. And it's usually also where somebody's coming in wanting to protect something already. Again, there'll be provisions in there where it's like, well, this is mutual. Your retirement is also going to remain your retirement, or I'm also waiving spousal support from you. So they try to portray it as though you're both going to benefit, but it always seems to be, at least again what I have seen, that somebody's coming in with something already on their side of the column, so to speak, that puts them already at an advantage coming
Yeah.
into it and already kind of at that higher position. So they're already, again, kind of ahead of the curve. And since our firm, we only represent women, stereotypically and statistically, when you're looking at the financial, future for women who go into the career field, if they choose to go into the career field, we typically have the lower incomes. We typically have less retirement that we're able to save, less assets that are in our own names, again, or we're typically the ones who are choosing to stay home with kids if kids are in our future and in our family. And so we're already at a disadvantage anyway. And then when we've signed those prenups that have put those assets into that particular earner's name and stays in that particular earner's name from the get-go, again, we're just kind of setting ourselves up for that disadvantage. And so typically,
Yeah.
again, I'm seeing the person who's going to end up being the more disadvantaged party should that prenup be signed prior to the marriage starting.
Yeah, kids change everything, right? I think that's one of like the
Hmm.
big things that I see in a lot of these cases. It's one thing when you're going into your marriage to be like, well, I'm the higher earner right now. Maybe he has a trust fund or something that he's trying to protect, but I'm the higher wage earner. It's kind of a mistake to assume that things are going to continue the same way as they currently exist, especially if you're going to add children to the equation. But really, it's not even just children. So many things can change over the course of the intervening years between now when you're engaged or thinking about getting engaged and if you eventually divorce. I mean,
Right.
not just divorce, but disability and all sorts of other things can happen that can change your earning potential. And maybe call me old-fashioned and sentimental, but I believe that entering into a marriage is creating a partnership where you guys, bring assets together. You try to build a future together, and you're not from the very, very beginning trying to craft ways to limit your partner's ability to recover a portion of what was earned during that time. You're trying to build a
Hmm.
life together. And to the extent that a prenup doesn't allow you to do that, I think that's a big mistake. I think that's something that you're going to regret. And I think that also, if you don't have children and you add children, and then you have to make big decisions about whether you're going to stay at home or work part time or work from home or work in a reduced capacity, maybe even work for a company that doesn't pay as well but offers great benefits. We see women making all sorts of sacrifices to support their families and to support the demands of raising children. And we already have things on a, kind of an institutional level that are working against us. Like Caitlyn kind of touched on it, but the wage gap and the lack of maternity and paternity leave policies that make it so that women are leaving the workforce at kind of unprecedented numbers. And those things, compounded over time can mean that, while you may not have qualified for spousal support today under your situation as it exists now, that doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to contribute to your retirement to the same degree. And you really want to think not just in terms of what exists today, but what could exist in a situation 20 years from now. And none of us have crystal balls. We can't predict the future. We've just kind of done, Caitlyn and I, we've been together for a while. We've been doing this for a long
Yep.
time. I can tell you, I mean, and that's kind of the nature of money too, right? Like it's not so much what it's worth today, but what it's going to be worth years and
Hmm.
years and years from now as interest compounds and, the real estate market changes and, any number of things can happen. So you just want to make sure that you're prepared for all those eventualities and you don't, chop off your own foot from the very, very beginning and give yourself so many fewer options if your marriage does eventually end, which hopefully it won't.
Right.
But hopefully everybody's going to live happily ever after. But
Hmm.
you don't, I mean, we don't deal in best case scenarios. So I
No.
think it's fine. I think it's fine to just admit that. But, many, many marriages do go on to be completely successful. And chances are, at least 50% that, your marriage will be that way too. But it's still smart to consider the possibility, especially if it's being forced on you now in the form of a possible prenuptial agreement. Let's not just go into this so starry eyed and so in love that we assume that nothing could ever come between us.
Right.
Um, let's just not do that.
Good plan.
I know you believe in marriage too, Caitlyn's one of those like disgusting people who met and married her high school sweetheart and
I
has this beautiful
did. I did.
family.
There he is back there.
Yeah, but even so, I think even Caitlyn, even the most romantic among us would say, just
Be
keep
smart.
in mind. Yeah, keep in mind we don't know
Mhm.
what the future's going to bring.
Right. Right. Right.
Have you seen specific provisions in the prenups that you've seen, Caitlyn, that women should just categorically avoid?
Yeah, I think any provision that is an absolute provision. So any provision that is, an absolute waiver of spousal support, like we
Mhm.
are waiving spousal support, period. Hard stop. We are waiving retirement, period. Hard stop. Anything like that that doesn't give any type of what I kind of refer to as like a triggering event. So some of the provisions that I see that are worth considering, which is, kind of flipping your question here, um, maybe a provision that just said, if we're married for less than a certain amount of time, then we aren't going to seek spousal support. That might be worth considering.
Mhm.
Or, I've seen some provisions where, we say we'll waive spousal support unless we can prove, maybe that one of us has become disabled and we're unable to work. Or if our incomes are within a certain percentage of each other, we waive spousal support. Or, so if there are, kind of exceptions or other things that might bring up ways for those
Mhm.
waivers to be waived, which I know that was kind of like a weird way to say that, that might be worth considering. So those overarching like absolute provisions I think are kind of problematic. I think also any provisions that I see that really kind of undermine the idea of a partnership again are kind of concerning. And I would steer clear of. Had a case recently where there were discussions of, kind of undermining or not valuing and not making there any kind of division possibility for any investment or work that one party had towards the increase in value of the other party's asset. Well, to me, if I've invested, whether it is monetary or non-monetarily, towards my spouse's, property, whether it is his business or real estate or something to that of, something like that, and I did that during the marriage, that increase in value is marital property and can be divided in the event of a divorce. And that should be the idea of a marriage, right? Like as Katie said earlier, it's a partnership. I should want to help benefit the family as a whole. But if I'm going into this knowing, well, if I'm going to, work really hard at this and I'm going to put my effort into this, but it's not going to do me any good if we end up splitting in the future, I'm not going to want to do that. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
that's just me personally. I'm just kind of, bullheaded that way. But so that seems really counterproductive to a successful marriage and a successful family unit. So
Yeah.
I think any type of provision like that that really kind of undermines the purpose and goals of a marriage should really be looked at with some skepticism.
Yeah.
So again, those are kind of really big ones that I see that are just really problematic, I think, in any type of prenup.
Yeah, absolute no-nos are provisions without limits. We can put
Yes.
in so many different limits. We have a lot of flexibility when it comes to negotiating contracts, whether we're talking about a prenuptial agreement, a post-nuptial agreement, a separation agreement. We negotiate these contracts at all sorts of different stages of marriages, and there's a lot of things that we can put in there that limit the applicability of these provisions. And you said it before we jumped on this recording, Caitlin, but I thought it was a really good point. You said that you had that client who's a future partner presented them with an agreement, and that then you kind of broke down what her entitlement would have been under the law, and she was really upset. Keep in mind that in a lot of cases we're using sort of form documents, like this is what our prenup looks like, so we're putting all of these
Hmm.
things in, and there's a lot of catch-alls. We do that for a lot of reasons. For one, because if we happen to get it signed and it's extremely beneficial to our client, that's really helpful, but also because it's a starting point for negotiations.
Right.
So don't definitely have it reviewed. Make sure you understand, make sure you know what's in it and what you would have been entitled to receive under the law if you didn't have a prenup. But don't think that necessarily your spouse was trying to be, or your intended spouse was trying to do something shady here. Have a conversation. You're going to marry this person. You plan to marry this person. So have a conversation about what your goals and objectives are. I think it is helpful to lay it all out on the table now before you've gotten married, because you can still decide to walk away if you don't like
Hmm.
the answer that you're given, or the revisions to the prenuptial agreement don't really reflect your shared goals or your vision for your marriage. So, I mean, in some ways, it is helpful to have your partner just put it all out there like that, whether, good, bad, or somewhere in the middle. At least you're having an honest conversation while you can still make a different decision if you choose to make a different decision. But
Right.
if it were me, I would not go into a marriage where they were completely cutting off my ability to access the retirement that we earned during the marriage, or increase in equity in the assets that we contributed to, like you were describing, Caitlin. There's you just don't know what's going to happen, and you don't want to put yourself in a position 20, 30 years from now where you're destitute.
Yeah.
And that's what's really at stake here. It's not just whether this
Hmm.
wedding is going to go on or not, and you're going to have to tell your family that you changed your mind. It's like, are you going to live in poverty in old age? Are you going to be able to support yourself? Are you going to have a work history that means that you can leverage yourself into something that's lucrative enough to keep the lights on and food in the
Right.
refrigerator? So the stakes are high, and it's really important to look at everything that can happen as you negotiate your prenuptial agreement.
Right. And I have a lot of clients who are going through divorces that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. So divorces
Mhm.
aren't just happening to people who are
Yeah,
20s, 30s, 40s who still have time to, make a living, earn a career, contribute to retirement before that is their sole source of income.
yeah,
So it does happen and can happen when you really are at a position where your options for financial resources for living are incredibly limited. And so
mhm,
you just want to make sure again that you go into it being wise. Again, the goal and hope is that if a prenup gets signed, that it's never going to come to being
yes,
needed because the marriage is going to last and everybody's going to live happily after, as we said. But in the off chance that it is needed, or does become applicable, you want to make sure that it is going to, you know, be fair and equitable and have terms that are going to not leave you in incredibly difficult, if not impossible, financial straits.
yeah. Eyes wide open, people. I think that's if I could give you a single takeaway, that would be it. But
Yep.
I'm deeply glad, Caitlin, that you have the same feelings about
Yeah.
prenups as me.
Don't like
Sometimes
them.
I get on the internet, which I should never do, but
No.
I scroll through social media and I see these things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, no, this
No.
is not the solution that you think it is. So, I
Mm-mm.
mean, like Caitlin said from the very, very beginning, if you are presented with a prenup, if you're considering a prenup, talk to an attorney, talk to someone licensed in your state, get an idea of, what you would be entitled to receive and what limits you can place on this agreement before it's too late. Do not just go in starry-eyed and blindly sign this thing. You are going to be held to it. The court is almost certainly not going to overturn it. There's not going to be any way out. So the opportunity to get it right is now, and you need to take it
Mm.
seriously. Um,
Absolutely.
but Anyway, Caitlin, thank you so much for being here. I think this was really helpful,
Yeah.
and I appreciate everyone for tuning in. Stay tuned next time. We'll be talking about more interesting family law topics in Virginia. And in the meantime, if you need more information, feel free to check out our website at hofflaw.com. That's HOFLAW.com. We've got 4 free books, a number of reports and articles, and tons of information about upcoming divorce and custody seminars and our Girls Night Out event series, even our annual Memorial Scholarship Competition. So check us out, and thanks again for tuning in.